Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Good effort, Meg. Today we are making this sweater. And I'm using a newer technique that I haven't personally used, so newer to me, not newer to the world of sewing, but I'm gonna use an existing garment that I have to trace out and make a pattern that I use to make this sweater. So without further ado, let's get crafting. So first thing we're gonna need is our fleece fabric with the Legend of Zelda pattern on it. I decided this time to try a technique where you trace a sweater that you already have. So I have it turned inside out. You're going to need some materials to trace and cut out your pattern from the existing sweater. And you can use some craft paper like what I have here, or you can use like wrapping paper or just whatever you have on hand to trace out your sweater. So for tracing the existing sweater, I just folded it in half and traced as accurately as I could using a pencil on the craft paper and just kind of making little tick marks and such. This is my first time doing this technique, so it was a little bit tricky, but once I understood what I was supposed to be doing, it made a lot more sense. After I did a rough sketch using the sweater, I used a combination of these different tailoring rulers to sure up my lines. Again, I've never done this before, so it took me a while to figure out exactly what each ruler was used for. I would suggest, like, if you haven't, or like if you don't have tailoring rulers, like, I don't really think they're super necessary. Like, I wouldn't go out and buy one specifically for this. I would try this technique first and see if you like it. And then if you think you might do this technique again, then sure, buy yourself a set. Yeah, it was a little tricky trying to figure out which ruler to use where. I think my experience working with pre-made patterns definitely helped me understand how the lines should look. So here are all of my pattern pieces after they've been traced and cut out. And here are all of the fabric pieces cut out. So I didn't show this part just because I think the pattern making was a little more important. So the very first step, pretty much whenever you're making a top, is to take your front and back pieces and put them right sides together, matching up those shoulder seams. And I'm just showing you how I could tell that I'm putting the right sides together. Fortunately, with like patterned fleece, the quote-unquote wrong side kind of looks like a blurry version of the right side. But yeah, just match up your shoulder seams and pin or clip these together. I started off by using pins and I later switched to clips just because the fabric was so thick. But yeah, go ahead and stitch those. I used a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So here are the waistband pieces, and we are going to put those right sides together and pin on both sides of the short side, if that makes sense. So we are going to be making like one long hoop, and I know this seems like a really wide piece of fabric for a waistband, so this will be like at the bottom of the sweater, but just keep in mind that this will be folded in half technically in the finished product, so it'll actually end up being half the width. And same thing, a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides. So this is our neckband, and we are going to fold it with right sides together, hamburger style, and pin at that end. And we will stitch that end with a 1/4 inch seam allowance as well. And this is essentially making the collar of the sweater. So for the wristbands, we are going to fold these hamburger style and then pin that end And again, these seem really wide for wristbands, but just remember this is going to be half the width because these will be folded in half to complete the waistband in the final product. So just pin this in, and again, as every other piece, we will stitch this with a straight stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can pick whatever seam allowance you would like when you're creating your own pattern. I just picked a 1/4 inch just because that's what I'm used to using anyways. If you want a little bit more wiggle room, maybe use a 1/2 inch or something similar. So now that all the pieces are pinned together and ready for stitching, we are going to move on to stitching all of the pieces. And I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance for all of those seams that we pinned previously. I wanted to change up the order that I normally do my sewing routine a little bit to see if I was able to save some time. And I do think I did save quite a bit of time by just pre-pinning all of my pieces and then stitching everything in one go rather than pinning something, stitching it, pinning something, stitching it, etc. So I would recommend you experiment with your sewing routine and see if you can save yourself a bit of time here and there. It definitely adds up in the end, but I wouldn't say it was like super drastic change in time, but it was enough to make a difference. We're going to do is attach the collar to the sweater. So I start off by marking my front and back center and side seams just by folding it and marking it with chalk. I did this on both the collar piece and on the shirt. And I started at the back seam, lining that up with my center back, and with right sides together, you're just gonna pin this collar all the way around the opening of the sweater. Before you pin it on, this is also a great time to make sure that that collar piece will fit over your head. I actually had to go back and cut a different neck piece that was a little bit longer because the initial one was too small and would not fit over my head. So definitely before you stitch this collar piece on, make sure it will fit over your head. But once the collar is pinned to your shirt or your sweater, you will go ahead and stitch it. I just used a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. After you attach the collar to the sweater, you'll just essentially fold that collar piece in half towards the inside of the sweater, and you can do stitch in the ditch or however you choose, but essentially you're just like rolling that collar piece down so that way a raw edge is not going to brush up against your neck or be visible to the outside of the sweater. I will say, if you're making a fleece sweater, to maybe not fold in the raw edge again like I would typically do with like cotton or something, because the fabric gets really bulky really quickly. So now we are going to attach the sleeves to the sweater. So line up that center seam with the peak of the sleeve and just pin along the edge with right sides together, pulling and kind of manipulating the fabric as you need. And we will stitch the sleeves on using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, just like all the previous seams. Now we are going to line up the side seams, starting with the armpit, and clip or pin all the way down the side seams, and then we will stitch the sweater closed using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. side seams closed up, we are going to attach the waistband and wristbands. So I started with the waistband, and we're going to do right sides together. So I kind of tuck the sweater into the waistband, and I definitely started at the two side seams of both the waistband and the sweater. I really wanted those to line up nice and neatly and just clip along that edge all the way around. So again, we're doing this right sides together and lining up those side seams. And just like what we did with the waistband, we are going to attach those wristbands. So right sides together, so you're kind of tucking the sleeve into the wristband. And you're going to put right sides together, line up those seams, and clip it all the way around. And all of these pieces will be stitched on using a 1/4 inch seam allowance or whatever seam allowance you chose. So the last step is to fold the waistband and wristbands in half and then stitch them so that way you don't have a raw edge showing on the outside. So how I did this was I just kind of folded it over the sleeve and I stitched through all those layers, being careful not to accidentally close your sleeve up. I tried a couple of different ways, and this was the only way I was able to get my presser foot access to that stitch line. I suppose you could go ahead and hand sew this, but I just try to avoid hand sewing as much as possible just because I don't like doing it. This is what it should look like on the inside of your sweater, and then you flip it right side out. And I think it looks really nice. So just do that for both of the sleeve cuffs and for your waistband. I think it looks mighty nice. It kind of like a little puff effect. And here is what the final sweater looks like. So this is the front with Link and the back with Zelda. So I'm super happy with the way that this sweater came out. It is literally like wearing a blanket. It is so warm. Not sure why I waited until June to make a sweater because at least in my area, we're seeing temperatures above 90 degrees. So I probably won't wear this too much right now. But I definitely think it's going to be kind of like my little gaming sweater for when I'm sitting at my desk, because I typically get cold really easily. So this is definitely going to be handy for me. Also, the process of making my own pattern using a piece of clothing that I already own, I think it went really well. I definitely would want to tweak some things here and there. But I'm glad I tried it, and I think that you guys should try it as well, because again, this is a way that you can get into sewing and it's free. You just need some paper, a pencil, and a piece of your own clothing, and you can make your own patterns. Otherwise, I think I'll definitely make more of these sweaters in the future, and yeah, would recommend. So I hope you guys learned something from watching this video, and if you want to give making a sweater a try as well, I hope you do. I hope this is a helpful resource for you. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to check out my other videos. If this was helpful to you, be sure to hit that like button, and otherwise I will see you guys in the next video. Bye! Okay, it's like 1,000,000 degrees, so I'm gonna go take this off. Holy cow.